seconds to go. Order. And I welcome my colleagues and of course the Prime Minister to this session of the Liaison Committee, where we are going to try and cover four main topics: standards and ethics, violence against women and online harms, the outcome of the COP26 summit and its implementation, and the budget and spending review. We have 15 colleagues participating in this session, and Prime Minister, I request that you give us your customary extra time, and even a little bit extra if you can afford it, in order that we can cover all the topics, and I'm very grateful for that.
I will do my best to oblige you as ever, Sir Bernard. I've got quite a lot on.
I appreciate
but
that.
I will do my best.
Prime Minister, you're slightly hoarse of voice this afternoon. You can save your voice by giving nice short answers. And I will give the committee short shrift.
Not if you keep me for longer.
Short shrift if their questions are too long, though they are entitled to use their time as they please. So we'll go straight to the first topic. William Wragg, Chairman of PACA.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, can you understand the public mood that there is in much of the country about standards issues around members of Parliament and ministers, and care to reflect upon that in light of the events a couple of weeks ago?
Yes, thank you, William. Thank you, Mr. Wragg. I think that there is a feeling that we need to be getting on and ensuring that we have the utmost propriety in our dealings with each other, with the public, and that the public can have full confidence in the system. And what I would like to place on record, though I've said it before, is that I think it was a mistake 2 weeks ago to conflate the very sad and difficult case of a particular colleague who'd fallen foul of the Commissioner for Standards and the Standards process, and the need for, as many colleagues saw it, rightly or wrongly, for reform and improvement to the system, and in particular to the system for appeals in the event of very difficult cases. And what I hoped to achieve was some sort of cross-party progress on that. Plainly that wasn't possible. What I would like to see now is cross-party progress on endorsing some of the, I think, very useful conclusions of the independent report on the report of the Independent Committee on Standards and Privileges of 2018.
Thank you. And just specifically on the Ministerial Code, as I'm sure that the Chair of the Standards Committee will have further questions. But how do you view the Ministerial Code? Do you see it as a constitutional document? Do you see it as a guide? Do you see it as advisory? What's its status in your eyes?
I think the Ministerial Code is extremely important. As you know, it's been greatly strengthened in the last few years and elaborated in very clear terms to give guidance for ministers. What I've done is brought in an independent advisor to me as I'm the upholder, the guarantor of the Ministerial Code, but what I think I benefit from is independent advice about how to implement it, and that's what Lord Geidt provides.
As well as that oversight, you as Prime Minister are bound by the Ministerial Code, is that right?
Of course.
Do you sense a slight conflict of interest in that settlement? And might not the independent advisor do well to be invested with the powers of initiation of investigation?
Well, that's a very good question. I think there are difficult constitutional issues raised in that, but where we've got to is that Lord Geidt has the ability to suggest to me that something might be worth investigating, or that there's some issue that has been raised under the Ministerial Code, and I think it's highly unlikely that I would in any circumstances disagree with him. And we proceed on that basis, and I find him an exceptionally valuable source of advice. And to give an example, recently the committee will have noted that the Business Secretary wrote a letter to the Commissioner for Standards setting out an explanation and an apology for some recent comments, and that was certainly something that was generated in the course of consultation between me and Lord Guy.
And traditionally, breaches of the code have meant resignation or sacking, one or the other. Do you think it's therefore too much of a blunt instrument? And could you update us on any progress that's been made of a gradation of sanctions that might make the Ministerial Code more applicable?
Yes, that's also another important point. The Ministerial Code is quite quite compendious. It covers a lot of things, and as it was initially constituted, it was basically a hair trigger code, so that one toe cap over any of the red lines, and you were finished. It's the view of Lord Guyton. I think that it's reasonable that there should be gradations, and that there should be ways in which there should be other sanctions, and a breach of the ministerial, a small breach, I should say, of the Ministerial Code should not necessarily lead to resignations. That's his view, as I understand it.
Following the Greensill episode, if we might describe it as that, you commissioned Nigel Boardman to review what had happened, and part 2 of that was published recently, admittedly during the middle of the government reshuffle. Have you considered those recommendations, and in particular, do you think that ACABA, in its in strictures of employment restrictions and former ministers, do you think those recommendations should be made legally binding, as Boardman suggests?
We're considering the Boardman recommendations, Mr. Ragg, and we will report back to you and to your committee.
But in this moment, Prime Minister, what's your thoughts on that? Your instinctive thoughts?
I certainly think that the ACOBA process is invaluable, and it should be incumbent upon anybody leaving public office to follow those rules.
Pretty toothless organisation, though.
No, the people have to abide by the ACOBA rules, and the Cabinet Office, Simon Case and others are leading work with ACOBA and Eric Pickles to see what improvements can be made, and we'll be reporting back.
But with respect, they don't have to follow the recommendations. They can do what they like. They're issued a very polite letter, but they can simply disregard that, and there's quite a few examples of that has happened. So it's a pretty toothless organisation. Do you think, therefore, as part of this work that we're taking forward, it can be strengthened?
We do think that there is scope for improving it. What I'm saying to you is, as a result, we haven't yet formed a hard and fast view about how to do that.
Thank you, Sir Bernard.
When do you think we'll form a view on that matter?
We'll be updating later this year.
Later this year.
Not that there's much time left in this year. Later this year.
Chris Bryant.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. Can I just check in one of the answers there? You just said that the Business Secretary had written to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards apologising. Excellent. As I understand it, you were saying there that Lord Guyte had asked him to do so.
That's not quite what I said. I said that the process by which the letter was generated was one that involved collaboration between me and Lord Guyte, and my reliance upon him for his advice.
So you told the Business Secretary to apologise?
And that's a very important thing.
So you told the Business Secretary to apologise?
That's a matter between me and the Business Secretary, but if you mean did Lord Guyte ask the Business Secretary to apologise, the answer to that is no.
But you're not telling us then whether you did or didn't, because some of us might gently suggest to you that we were surprised that the Business Secretary would freelance when he went on the air. One presumed that you'd asked him to go on the air to call for the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards to resign.
No, well, that's obviously not right. No, I didn't do that. And
did you know in advance that he was going to do that?
No, and just to clear the matter up, since I don't want to leave any ambiguity for for the committee. I certainly thought it was appropriate for the Business Secretary to write in the way that he did, and supported him in that.
Why is the list of ministerial interests only published twice a year? Because most of every year it's not even an accurate list of ministers, let alone of their interests.
Well, the list of ministerial interests is there to be consulted. I think insofar as members also serve as MPs, which of course ministers also serve as MPs, which of course they do. Their parliamentary interests are there to be consulted and to be updated at very regular very regular intervals.
Well, the Commons publishes a rolling register which includes everything every fortnight, and you can see the whole of the House of Commons on a single document. But the government tucks all the details for ministers away in 232 separate documents online. That isn't really transparency, is it?
Well, I disagree. The MPs who are ministers, and that's majority of ministers, have to register all their interests in the parliamentary register.
Oh no, but they don't, do
There's
they?
the additional register of ministerial interests.
Okay, so let me give you an example. If two MPs were sitting next to each other in a box, being wined and dined, guests of some business or industry body, one was a backbench MP and the other was a government minister. The backbench MP would have to register this with the House of Commons within 28 days, but the minister, and would have to give details of the amount that it cost, but the minister wouldn't have to register the amount of money that it cost at all, ever, and the registration would only appear 6 months later. That's just unfair, isn't it? Shouldn't there be one rule for everybody?
Well, I think that what you get, I'm sure that most MPs would register their interest in if they've been taken out to dinner, they would register their interest in the register of MPs.
So you think ministers should?
I think that the system that we have is the one that I inherited, and it seems to work pretty well. But if you have recommendations, Mr. Bryant, to improve it, then I'm sure that the House will be interested to see them.
Excellent, thank you. Can I just ask you, because I don't quite understand, do you think that Owen Paterson was guilty or not?
I think it was a very sad case, but I think there's no question that he had fallen foul of the rules on paid advocacy, as far as I could see from the report. I think the question that people wanted to establish was whether or not, given the particularly tragic circumstances, he'd had a fair right to appeal. And
he had an appeal. His appeal was heard endlessly, both by the committee.
Yes, Mr. Brown, I wish to restate that informing the impression that the former member for North Shropshire had not had a fair process, I may well have been mistaken. But that was certainly the impression that many people seem to have.
Theresa May said yesterday that your actions over this case were misplaced, ill-judged, and just plain wrong. Well,
I think I've said several times now that I do think it was a mistake to conflate, as we did, those two things. A particularly difficult case. It's not often in our House of Commons when a colleague suffers a family bereavement in the course of an investigation. There was quite a lot of feeling about it, and for that reason, in a spirit of compassion, I thought it might be useful to see whether there was any cross-party support.
But you didn't approach cross-party at all, did you? You told John Whittingdale that there was a cross-party agreement to set up this committee, but that wasn't the case, was it?
So it would seem.
Well, why did you tell him that?
Well, I can't comment on that conversation since I didn't have it. But what I can say is that I believed that there would be cross-party support for the idea
How did you believe this? Just out of your head, you came up with it.
It was put to me that people
by whom?
By colleagues that people would feel, and indeed I was fortified in this by the reflection that many people would have felt that this was a particularly difficult and sad case, and many people across the House would have felt a degree of sympathy for the member for Shropshire North, and would have thought that in those particular circumstances that it might have been possible to consider whether the process was capable of improvement. And I'm very willing to accept that I was mistaken in that belief.
The problem is that you say that the country's not corrupt. But what Owen Paterson did was a corrupt practice. It was lobbying ministers and officials on behalf of his paying clients. It's a corrupt practice.
I can see
and the danger is that you've just tarred up, but by all of this, you've tarred the whole of the House with the same brush, and yourself, haven't you?
It was, as I said, if you will recall what I said, Mr. Bryant, at the Prime Minister's questions on that Wednesday, I began by saying that paid advocacy and lobbying is against the rules, and anybody who does that should be properly penalised. That was how I began. So the intention genuinely was not to exonerate anybody. The intention was to see whether there was some way in which, on a cross-party basis, we could improve the system. Now, in retrospect, it was obviously mistaken to think that we could conflate the two things. And do I regret that decision? Yes, I certainly do, Mr. Brown.
Looking forward, Prime Minister, you will accept the recommendations of the Standards Committee that are agreed between the parties, that have the consensus. You will.
I think it's
the government will facilitate the implementation of those changes.
Which changes?
Whichever changes the Standards Committee comes up, agreed between all the parties.
Yes, I think what we're saying is that there should be. I mean, are you talking about changes to the standards system?
Indeed.
Of course, and I hope that there can be a cross-party progress on that. And I further hope that there can be cross-party progress, whether in the Standards Committee or in some other cross-party body of the House, on the issues that I described earlier and I described in the House, relating to the conditions and the stipulations under which we serve, and we are able to have outside trades, callings, professions, interests, and so on, which, as the Independent Committee has said, is of use to the House.
And just following up the question raised by Mr. Ragg, for which I have great sympathy, because his committee under my chairmanship reached the same conclusion about the ability of the independent advisor to instigate investigations. I still don't understand the objection that you have to this, which you say you will almost always accept his recommendations to have an investigation. Now that you are going to be encouraged to take control of the sanctions and mitigate the sanctions to reflect circumstances, what is the objection to allowing the independent advisor to instigate his own inquiries? I don't understand it.
Well, thank you. So what the independent advisor, you mean Lord Geit?
Yes.
The Ministerial advisor. So what Lord Geit can certainly do under the new dispensation that we've agreed is that he can suggest to me at his own initiative.
But under what circumstances would you want to veto that?
At his own initiative, and something that he thinks bears investigation or needs to be corrected, or where something has gone wrong. And as I said, I think in my opening answer, it's hard to think of circumstances in which I would want to overrule him.
Well, I can't imagine any either. So why not just give him the power?
Well, I think I think the situation.
I hope
the balance. I think people can see that the balance of the situation is, I think, well judged at the moment.
Yvette Cooper, Home Affairs.
Thank you, and welcome, Prime Minister. Can I just follow up, just clarify quickly, just some of the responses you've just given to William Ragg and Chris Bryant. This is an area where we really need clarity, given your important role, and you used a slightly odd form of words in response to William Ragg. You said it's a mistake to conflate the sad and difficult case of a colleague who has fallen foul of the Commissioner on Standards. Could you just clarify, do you believe that Owen Paterson broke the rules? Yes or no?
Yes, and at least that seems to me to. Yes, I do. What we were, as I said at the beginning of the PMQs 2 weeks ago, we did not seek to in any way minimise the importance of that. People who break the rules on paid advocacy must.
You are still qualifying it. You're still saying, well, it seems to me. Do you recognise that given your responsibility to uphold the ministerial code, to uphold the rules, to uphold the standards, it's really important that you should not give any impression that when there is an independent report that found on 14 occasions of paid lobbying, that somehow you think that's okay. Can you clarify you don't think it's okay and you don't think that what Owen Paterson did was right?
Of course I don't. And that was the first thing I said when I began on this subject 2 weeks ago. And frankly, I think I think it is extraordinary that colleagues sometimes do behave in this way, and it is quite right that the Commissioner is able to investigate and to hold them to account. I think I've always sought to do, and I think the committee will agree that I've accepted that it was a mistake and that it was my mistake. All we wanted to do was to see whether, in view of the particular and frankly tragic circumstances of the case, there was any scope for cross-party agreement on an appeals process. That was all we were trying to do.
And given that you have said that you did ask the Business Secretary to apologise, the Cabinet Office Secretary has also apologised, would you express your own regret for not having said 3 weeks ago that Owen Paterson broke the rules, which would have provided clarity about the standards that you expect to be upheld?
Yeah, I began 2 weeks ago, I think it was, by saying that those who broke the rules should pay a price. And,
no, the issue is whether you should have said 3 weeks ago.
Yes, in retrospect.
Yes,
Thank you. Yes, in retrospect, it might have helped a bit if I'd said that I believe that Owen had broken the rules as far as I could see.
You see, as far as I could see, you have an independent process that has looked into this. Every time you say, as far as I could see, well, it seems to me, and you try and qualify it, you are undermining an independent system that we need to work.
Yes,
all of us need this to work. We need you to have some integrity. We need you to be able to uphold the standards.
Yes, then let me repeat. It was clear to me that he'd broken the rules. He'd fallen foul of the rules that we have in Parliament. And I made clear at the outset of my statement, my first answer in PMQs, that for me, that's something that deserves punishment. My question was, in all humility, given the particular circumstances of the case, whether there was any cross-party support for improvement to the system. That was what we were trying to achieve. I can now see that was a mistake. I also think it was a mistake not to go ahead with the 2018 report of the Independent Committee on Standards in public life, and I think the House should have implemented those conclusions as well.
And do you also accept that the problem is that with all the prevaricating, with all of the attempting to still be defensive about the things that actually everybody accepts that you got wrong, that whether it is
I'm not remotely prevaricating.
it sounds a lot like prevarication, whether it is, there's a whole series of things that creates an impression that is very unfortunate and is very damaging to public life, whether it is not wearing a mask in a Hexham hospital, whether it is the initially defending colleagues who have broken the rules in a series of different cases. Do you accept that you have a responsibility to go above and beyond,
yes, of course,
to go further than everybody should expect,
I do.
and to actually establish much higher standards?
I do. And look, thank you, Yvette and Ms. Cooper. And yes, I think it was a total mistake not to see that Owen's breach of the rules, Owen, the former member for North Shropshire's breach of the rules, made any discussion about anything else impossible. And I totally accept that. But as for not wearing a mask in Hexham Hospital, which you wrap up into my general litany of crime, can I just say that actually there was barely 30 seconds when I wasn't wearing a mask. I walked out of a room mistakenly not wearing it. I then put it on as soon as I realised I'd made that mistake. I apologise for it, but most pictures of my visit to the hospital will show that I was duly masked throughout the remainder of the visit, and I was masked on the way in to the visit. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to clear that up.
Let me briefly and ask you around the... I'm not actually, because it didn't start till 3:20. Let me ask you then briefly just around the violence against women and girls. Less than 1% of actual rapes are prosecuted, less than 2% of reported rapes. You've set a target to get prosecution rates back up to the 2016 levels by the end of the Parliament, but you've said that it's going to be really hard to meet that target, even though it's only 11%. So why is that? When it is such a shocking crime, why are we effectively letting 99% of rapists off and letting so many victims down?
Yvette, Mrs. Cooper, that's an incredibly important question, and it's something that I am campaigning on, working flat out now in government. I lead the Crime and Justice Task Force. This is our number one priority. You ask why it's so difficult. There are many reasons, but there are, as you will recall, there was a particular case in 2018 in which the evidence from a mobile phone was used by the defence to exonerate an alleged perpetrator of rape, and since then I'm afraid that there has been a huge reliance on mobile phone data by Defence Counsel. If I could, it's a very important point.
I understand. And I just
want to know tell you what we're doing about it.
This is the top priority. You said that it's your top priority for police forces, but you have refused to put it in the strategic policing requirement, which includes terrorism, child exploitation and organised crime. Will you review this and now put, if it is your top priority, will you put it into the strategic policing requirement and make it a requirement for forces across the country?
So we're making it the top priority for our police. And Maggie Blythe, the Deputy Chief Constable, has taken over the lead for it. We're insisting that mobile phones are handed back to victims within 24 hours. This is one of the reasons we have such victim attrition, which is one of the reasons we have such low prosecution rates, because victims don't feel confident in the system. We're going ahead under Section 28 with allowing victims to pre-record their evidence to give them more confidence, and we're putting a lot of money into ISVAs and IDVAs, Independent Sexual and Domestic Violence Advisors, so that they can help victims through the very difficult period of the trial, again to stop this attrition by victims of victims and the failure to prosecute enough people. We're also investing in many more prosecutors.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Chair. Do you agree that there's a ladder of offending when it comes to violence against women and girls, and that those who might perpetrate crimes like indecent exposure then move on to far more serious crimes like rape, kidnap, murder?
I do believe, thank you, I do believe there is evidence to support that. And if you look in particular at at the case of Wayne Couzens. That was something that, frankly, should have been picked up, and that is unquestionably going to form part of the investigation into what went wrong in that case.
Could there also then be a case to make crimes like public sexual harassment a specific crime, perhaps through the passage of the PCSC bill, which will come back to the Commons soon?
Well, we have, thank you very much, we have quite a lot of statute of one kind or another against serious assault, sexual violence, rape, and as Yvette Cooper has just been saying, the tragedy at the moment is we're not, and harassment, we're not enforcing these enough as it is. And I have to think about how really to tackle the crimes that the public want tackled, rather than widening the range of human conduct that we ask the police to criminalise and enforce against. What I want to see is proper enforcement of the existing law, and as Yvette was saying, prosecution, much more prosecution for those who are accused of rape. And at the moment, that's where the numbers are going wrong.
Having agreed that there's a ladder of offending, should we not have a plan to intervene earlier before those who are harassing women become sex offenders?
I think that what we need to do is, rather than expand the sphere of activity that we criminalise, we need to prosecute people more effectively and more successfully for the things that are already criminal. And there is abundance of statute that is not now being properly enforced, and that's what we're putting our investment into.
Baroness Newlove has an amendment down to the PCSC bill that would make misogyny a hate crime. Do you have any views on the progress that has been made in encouraging women to come forward, and the 75% of them in Nottinghamshire, where the pilot's being carried out, who now feel that they have had a positive outcome? And shouldn't we expand that?
Well, thank you. I'll study what Baroness Newlove has come up with, and I'm glad that women have the confidence to come forward. That's always very, very important. But I think the best way forward, the best way to tackle misogyny and to give women confidence, is to deal with the abundance of courses of conduct that are already illegal and that we are not doing enough to tackle, that we're not prosecuting enough, in particular rape. And that's why we want to double prosecutions for rape, but we are now seeing a small increase.
You're right to focus on the efforts that are going in to increase rape prosecutions, but one of the real challenges is the way women don't feel confident to come forward and report incidents. Isn't it fair to say that if public sexual harassment was a specific crime that they could point at, that the police could point at, and indeed that the Crown Prosecution Service could point out, you actually might see women with more confidence to come forward? I
think that all women should have the confidence to come forward and denounce the harassment or crime against them that they have experienced, and there are proper procedures for those claims and those complaints to be investigated.
One of the cultures underpinning male violence against women is the easy access to extreme, violent, degrading pornography. Can we have any confidence that the online harms legislation that you've said we're going to get to vote on before Christmas will do anything to address that? We know that people like Wayne Couzens access that sort of pornography. Should we be doing something to stop people like him from getting access to it?
I think that's an incredibly important point, because I do think that it is, you look at the evidence of people like Wayne Couzens, not just him, but also, I'm afraid, terrorist offenders, many others. It is clear that people are coarsened and degraded by this stuff, and we will see what we can do. The technological difficulties are quite extreme, but it's up to the online giants to make sure that they don't have this stuff on their systems, and we will take the steps necessary to hold them to account, and that is what the Online Harms Bill is designed to do.
So we can have confidence that there will be legislation that forces the massive online giants to do that.
I think it's time the online giants realised that they cannot simply think of themselves as neutral pieces of infrastructure. They are publishers, and they have responsibility for what appears on their systems. And the Online Harms Bill is designed to give effect to that distinction.
One final question quickly, Bernard. If there is a challenge around the culture that underpins male violence against women, should we start addressing that in schools, and should we look to be making consent classes compulsory?
I think that kids nowadays are given much better and more balanced instruction about these questions than was the case even 10 years ago, never mind 20, 30 years ago. But there is a way to go, and it's certainly something that I'm willing to look at.
Thank you.
Julian Knightford, Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Do you think that acts that are illegal offline should be illegal when committed online?
Give an example.
Cyber flashing. Cyber flashing. I can give you a description if you like, Prime Minister.
Cyber flashing. Yes, sorry. Yes, I think on the whole, cyber. I don't care whether flashing is cyber or not. It should be illegal.
Okay. So if that's the case, will you commit to expand what is at present the definitions of online harms? At the moment, we look at terrorism and child exploitation, which places a specific duty of care, following on from your answer to my honourable friend, on the social media giants to include such crimes as flashing and assisting self-harm, pushing people towards suicide, Prime Minister, on the face, crucially, on the face of online harms legislation, on the face of the bill.
I thank you, Mr. Knight, very much for your suggestion. I will make sure that we look at it. And as colleagues know, the Online Harms Bill is due to leave the joint committee.
With respect, though, Prime Minister, the difficulty we have is that there isn't going to be another online safety bill in this Parliament. There may not be one in another Parliament. So are you prepared to shun the opportunity right now to protect women and girls from such vile acts such as we described before, cyber flashing?
Yes, the answer to your question is yes, I certainly, if we can do something in the Online Harms Bill to stop cyber flashing, which is something that is clearly a scourge that is developing, then
well, it's not just about that. It also folds into the whole violence against women and girls and the whole strategy around this. That here's a key piece of legislative intervention that is going to come from the House, and so far the scope is so narrow with all the lobbying that goes on. It's just the idea that maybe perhaps
if you can draft something that will capture it, and let's have a look at it. And it sounds like a useful.
Given that there's a 5-day different time lag between the reporting of the Joint Committee and the promise to present legislation, just to be clear, will we have the second reading, as you promised at the dispatch box, of online harms legislation before Christmas? Yes or no?
I think that depends on the Joint Committee, I'm afraid to say, as far as I...
But Prime Minister, you said at the dispatch box you would bring the legislation forward before Christmas.
If the Joint Committee can conclude its work
in due time. With respect, Prime Minister, they are charged with the House Conservatives of doing that 5 days earlier. So you'll have 5 days between the Joint Committee reporting and the legislation, as you promised at the dispatch box, being presented to the House. Will you do that before Christmas, yes or no?
Well, if the Joint Committee reports in time, then yes. Well,
they will report. So you'll have 5 days, you'll do it if they report 5 days before.
We will report as soon as we can after the Joint Committee has concluded its work. If it can be done before Christmas, I think that would be a great thing. But as far as I understand it, the Joint Committee is due to report before Christmas, and after that, I don't know what the delay might be between bringing it back before the House.
Another thing, Prime Minister, you said at the dispatch box is that you wanted to see the potential criminal sanctions for social media giants if they fail in their duty of care. That leaves a lot of wriggle room with the word potential. I'd like to find out for you what you actually have in mind. will you incorporate a criminal sanction in the bill, in primary legislation, rather than incorporating the potential at a later date for the Secretary of State to introduce secondary legislation to thereby introduce criminal sanction? Criminal sanctions now or at the discretion of the Secretary of State?
I share your anxiety, Mr. Knight, about the deferred sanctions that we're currently looking at, and let me take that away.
All right. So, is that just a takeaway, or do you actually think that they should be in place in the bill itself, rather than just?
Let me put it this way: I think that we want the strongest possible deterrent and the strongest possible sanctions against people who run online companies who are allowing a torrent of hateful stuff to appear on their networks.
Just final question, Prime Minister. You said on the 24th of March in liaison committee to me that you would ensure that EU visas for creatives and those who are in the touring industry would be, I directly quote here, would be sorted. You'd get it sorted. Since then, the DCMS has had a total of 4 meetings, all with Spain, not with any other of the countries. We have the issue of Lord Frost failing to attend my committee for a long period of time until I had to put a point of order to the House. So, Prime Minister, is 4 meetings in 8 months? How's that getting it sorted?
Well, I'm very grateful to you for the work that you're doing. I know that at least 20 member states, including France and Germany, now offer visa and work permit free routes for touring musicians. And I think I read just yesterday or today that there had been a progress made in Spain. So we are continuing to.
Does that not show, Prime Minister, may I say, that actually meeting them does actually make a difference? That we should actually go and meet our bilateral partners in order to negotiate these deals? Because the issue is that we are losing huge swathes of the touring industry, and we were the centre of touring. It's far bigger than many other industries that we take a lot more time over. So I just wonder whether or not it would be actually now time to genuinely face up to this and to go and have these bilaterals. But at the same time, the idea of these other countries we have done, that was a press release that was released several months ago, and frankly, take my word for it, nothing has happened. Nothing has happened since March in terms of progressing until very lately as a result of those Spanish negotiations.
Okay, but I fully accept your criticism. But what I would say is that actually the circumstances have also been pretty difficult for touring of any kind for a long time, and what we want to see is markets opening up generally for touring musicians and for tourists of all kinds. We want to see many more people coming to London, whether they're musicians or not, and we should be making an effort to ensure that happens.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to this subject, Prime Minister. It's a subject I feel very, very strongly about, and I think the government could make a more coordinated effort. But can I just go back to the question of violence against women? Since Sarah Everard was murdered, about 80 more women have been murdered, nearly all by men, and at a time when women are feeling so vulnerable. What are you going to do to demonstrate that the government is behind them? And, for example, will you guarantee the safe spaces for women based on their sex, such as changing rooms, hospital wards, prisons and so on, which they feel are under threat?
Yes, so thank you, Sir Bernard. It's appalling to see crimes of violence against women. That's why I said in my answer to Yvette that it was our number one priority. What we're trying to do is all sorts of measures, from the Stalking Protection Order, the Domestic Abuse Act, the steps we're trying to take to increase prosecutions for rape. We're doing all that, and I'm not going to pretend that this is making as the progress as that I would like. It's not going as fast as I would want, but it is an absolute priority for the government. And we're doing things that make a small difference, such as putting a lot more money into street lights and making sure that We have many more female police officers, for instance. We have, I think, 42% of the Met is now female. 42% of the recruits are now female. So we're changing the culture, but we will not rest until women have confidence in the system, confidence in the streets, and confidence that they will get justice when they're attacked.
And you've been clear in a message to the Joint Committee looking at the Online Safety Bill that you would like them to include extreme violent pornography as harm, an online harm, and we need to protect our children from that.
I do think that, yes.
Thank you.
I do think I do.
So can we move on to, we're miles behind, of course, Bob Neal.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
Can I go back to conviction levels for rape cases?
Yes.
You're aware of the concern about it. You'd accept, of course, that there should only ever be a conviction if a jury is satisfied, beyond reasonable doubt, on lawfully admissible evidence as to the guilt of the person concerned. Yes? That being so, doesn't the success rate of prosecutions depend upon the quality of the evidence?
Yes.
And therefore the quality of the investigation?
Yes.
What more is being done to invest in investigation of rape and serious sexual offences, both at the police level, training, and at the Crown Prosecution Service level?
Thank you. So what we're doing is we're investing in I think about 85 million more into prosecutors for the CPS, specifically to try to give them more heft and to get cases done faster, to give victims more confidence. But what we're also doing, I chair the Crime and Justice Task Force, and I bring together the ministers responsible for all of this, from Lord Chancellor, Home Secretary, Minister for Policing and Crime, and so on. And what needs to happen is that the CPS, the prosecutors, and the police need to work absolutely hand in glove from the outset, rather than constantly passing the buck between each other about who has failed to assemble the requisite evidence, and that's who's left the file in the wrong condition. That's basically been one of the problems. So we're beefing up the CPS, but also trying to have much greater integration and grip by the police and the CPS together.
That's a fair observation, but also it's going to require resource to do that, isn't it?
It is.
Are you going to make sure that continues to be funded?
We are.
Can I also make the point that you referred to disclosure and the Liam Allen case? Would you accept that actually the right to disclosure of unused prosecution material, which may actually assist the defendant or may actually undermine the prosecution's case, is a fundamental safeguard in the system?
Yes, I do of course agree with that principle, but I think what has happened, sadly, is that a great deal of data and information has been mined from mobile phones, and that has produced pain and embarrassment and discomfiture on the part of victims, and has discouraged them from continuing with the case, and perhaps even deterred people from coming forward. And that's why it's vital that we delimit what the police can use in evidence from a mobile phone, restrict it to what is actually germane to the case, and make sure the phone is handed back within 24 hours.
Would you accept that that could be assisted by further investment in technology for the police and the Crown Prosecution Service to search digital material by artificial intelligence in the way that happens in serious fraud cases? Will we put the money in for that?
I do accept that this is an area where technology has moved very fast. Evidential demands, the demands upon the CPS and the police caused by this huge quantity of data have been very severe, and we need technology, artificial intelligence, to winnow it out, to get to what is actually necessary for the prosecution of the case.
The other great cause of victim attrition, of course, are delays in bringing cases to court. That requires courtrooms, lawyers and judges. will you be reviewing the level of funding made available to the court service and to defence lawyers to ensure that you have good quality lawyers who can handle these cases in a sensitive fashion on both sides of the case?
Yes, well, I have the utmost esteem for the legal profession, and I'm sure that they will do an excellent job. But what we are doing to invest in in speeding this up is we've got to try to clear backlogs in courts, as you know, and so we're funding 32 more Crown Nightingale courtrooms until the end of March. We've got courtrooms that you talk about technology, and you're quite right. We are equipping courtrooms with cloud video platforms, enabling more than 13,000 cases to be heard virtually every week, and we've removed the limit on the numbers of days the Crown Courts can sit, and so forth. We've got a new super courtroom in Manchester, and we're working flat out to bust the backlog.
Certainly, people are working flat out, and I know the judiciary and lawyers are. But are you also aware, however, that on a number of occasions recently, serious cases have had to be taken out of the list because lawyers were not available, either to prosecute or defend them, or because judges are not available. And that is because experienced lawyers are leaving the profession because of the low levels of pay. You have the chance to put that right with Sir Christopher Bellamy's review. Will you commit to funding the results of the Bellamy review into criminal legal aid?
I will certainly study the review into legal aid with great care and great interest. And we certainly believe that the criminal justice system needs proper funding. We've provided 150 million this year for victims and witness support services, getting back to the earlier points I was making. And the spending review gives another £500 million to the criminal justice system to help recover from the pandemic.
Thank you. And one final thing, another cause of delay is the length of time under which suspects are released under investigation rather than being bailed. That can last for many months and even years. The policing minister committed in Westminster Hall to reform of that. When are we going to see legislation to reform our RUI and go back to the previous system where you had time limits on bail brought forward?
I'm certainly very attracted to setting benchmarks, scorecards for the whole system, and that should include, in my view, timing, that should include deadlines. I think that justice delayed is justice denied, and it's also justice delayed is wildly more expensive.
It does require primary legislation to try.
I'm aware of that.
Are you?
I'm aware of that.
Will that be brought forward?
We're discussing it right now.
Thank you very much, Chairman of the Justice Committee. We're now going to move on to the outcome of COP26 and its implementation. And we start with Business, Energy, Innovation and Skills Committee Chair, Darren Jones.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, following COP26, will our climate change commitments become firm red lines in all future trade deals?
Forgive me. Sorry, Darren. Our climate change commitments...
Will they become firm red lines
yes.
in future trade deals?
They are commitments that we will certainly be keeping, and we lead the world. One of the reasons we were able to make, I think, a big positive impact at COP26 was because we stick to these commitments, and we've made significant reductions in CO2. So what we say to our friends and partners is that these matter to us. So when it comes to, for instance, Australia.
So on the Australia trade deal, Prime Minister, I asked you on Monday and you didn't answer the question. We dropped our climate change commitments in that trade deal in order to get it across the line. Do you regret that?
As far as I know,
no, we did, Prime Minister.
Our trade deal with Australia actually includes a substantive chapter on climate change, which reaffirms the commitments of both parties to upholding our obligations under the Paris Agreement, including limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And Australia, so I must humbly correct you there.
No.
Australia has
Prime Minister,
made
my question's not on Australia's climate change commitments.
I'm not here as a spokesman for the Australian government.
I understand, which is why I don't want you to answer for them, but answer
there was an agreement in our free trade deal
Prime
about
Minister,
climate change.
I'm going to move on. Will you give the Department for Levelling Up Housing in Communities the power to block decisions such as new coal mines in the UK?
These are matters that are already for the relevant planning authority.
I'm asking if after COP26 you'll give new powers to the department to block these things.
I think that these are already matters for the relevant planning authority.
So nothing will change?
And I think that what people can see is that this government leads the world in moving away from coal, and actually what you got at COP26 was quite a remarkable and historic event, as Greenpeace themselves.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The reason I asked the question is because
we're moving beyond coal.
We're not blocking a new coal mine in the UK, albeit for the steel industry. But instead of helping the steel industry move away from coal, we're facilitating a new coal mine. And it was cited at COP26 that undermined what we were trying to deliver at COP26, when there was progress, but not sufficient progress on coal. Do you not think our actions undermined our ambition?
No, I think on the contrary. I think what happened was that our actions convinced the world that it could be done. And what we had in the United Kingdom was an incredible exemplar of a country that used to be 80% dependent on coal for our electricity 50 years ago, is now less than 1% dependent, or 1 or 2% dependent on coal, and will go to zero. And we're going to zero carbon in our whole power generation system. It's a quite astonishing thing.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
And people could see that, and that was the most powerful
Prime Minister,
argument that we had.
We're short on time, so I just need to stick to my questions, if that's okay. The next question is on climate aid. It's been suggested that in order to meet our climate aid commitments at COP26, the Foreign Office will need to spend on average £2.3 billion a year, which is an increase of 140% based on previous figures on climate aid. That was not in the budget from the Chancellor recently. When will the Chancellor update the House on our increased climate aid commitments?
Mr. Jones, I don't recognise your figures. The ones I have in my head are that we've committed to another 11.6 billion pounds of climate aid, or aid to developing countries to go green. We further said that when we go back to 0.7, which the Chancellor's budget predicts we will go back to by 24-25, we will have a further £1 billion. So that's a £12.6 billion commitment from the UK around the world. That's an astonishing sum of money, and I think most people in this country think that they should. I think are amazed that we're making such a contribution, and we're doing it because we know it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Maybe we can confirm the figures in writing afterwards. It's been reported that you're minded to split up the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department to give the COP President Alex Sharma his own Energy and Climate Change Department. When I asked the Business Secretary about this yesterday, he disagreed. What's happening?
We have no such plans, and I think that it's one of the great things about COP26 was that we brought business.
That's fine. If there's no such plans, that answers my question. Thank you. My last question for you, Prime Minister, is about my committee's inquiry into the mine workers' pension scheme. We called for 100% of the profits from that pension scheme to go to the pensioners, instead of the government pocketing 50% of the surplus, as it has done historically. And during the 2019 general election in Mansfield, you said, and I'm quoting here, "I want to tell the Mansfield chap categorically that we will make sure that no Mansfield miner or any other miner signed up to the mine workers' pension scheme is out of pocket. We will make sure that all their cash is fully protected and returned. I've looked into it, and we will ensure that's done." But, Prime Minister, you rejected my committee's proposals to return those profits to the pensioners. I'm not sure why you said to those voters why you had looked into it and why you would return all their cash when, since, your government has clearly not done either. Did you mislead those voters in 2019?
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Jones, that I certainly didn't wish to give those voters any false impression.
But you said specifically that you had looked into it and you would ensure that it would be done, and you said it was categorical that was the case. It suggests that there was some thought behind it. You hadn't just mistakenly misled voters. No?
Well, I will have to get back to you on my quotation in the Mansfield chap, and I will write to you as soon as I can.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that. We will expect that So moving on to Philip Dung, Chairman of the Environment Audit Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. Prime Minister, in your opening remarks to the COP26 conference in Glasgow, you made clear your own personal commitment to, I think you said, irrefutably turning the tide and beginning the fight back against climate change. What changes do you think you need to make to the structure of government to be able to deliver net zero Britain?
I think that government is well structured to deliver net zero in the UK, and what we have is a COP president in Alok Sharma, who will help to continue to make sure that our climate change objectives, the world's climate change objectives, are delivered. And Alok is going to work with the incoming Egyptian presidency of COP, the Emiratis, who will be running the next COP28, and the real job of work now is global. We have to make sure that everybody, all the 190 plus countries, stick to the commitments that they made and make COP26 real.
So his focus will be on delivering the global commitments. At the moment, he chairs the Climate Action Implementation Committee, which relates entirely to the UK delivery. Will he continue to chair that committee?
Yes.
And when did you last chair the Climate Action Strategic Committee, which sits above it?
I can't give you the date, but it was not very long ago.
Would you mind letting us know? And
Certainly.
when will you be chairing the next one?
Well, we are driving the whole green industrial revolution throughout government, and it's something that I set out in the 10-point plan almost exactly a year ago. We've been leading it from the centre, but also relying on departments of state to get on and do it. And I pay tribute to Alok, but I also pay tribute to Bays, to Kwasi Kwarteng, and many other ministers who are running with this agenda. And since we produced the 10-point plan, we've actually seen investment in green technology in this country of the order of £15 billion, and the creation of many thousands of jobs.
I think that is the point, Prime Minister. You've set a plan, you've set a strategy, and I think there was good coordination in developing the net zero strategy across departments at civil service level. But the challenge is that the base department, only a sixth of its activities relate to this agenda, and other departments at the moment are being left more or less to their own devices to deliver, and there isn't the kind of oversight which would allow you to ensure they are delivering.
Well, that's not true, because...
Well, we're behind on the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth carbon budget projections for the coming...
Yes, but the oversight is being given by me, because we are driving the green industrial revolution, the 10-point plan. So on CB6, for instance, the only way to do that is to put in the cleaner, greener forms of heating, and that is something that we're continuing to push on very hard. It will be tough, but it can be done. And I think the lesson of clean technology over the last 20 years or so is that provided government gets behind it and shows that it's committed to it, the price will come down. The price of EVs is now falling. The price of wind and solar have fallen very sharply.
If the COP president is going to continue to chair the implementation committee, which I think sounds like a good idea, although it's UK focused, it will be diverting him from his global role, which seems challenging for him. Will you discuss with him the remit, the composition and the reach of the committee to make sure that they have the necessary powers to deliver across government? Because all the evidence that we've had for our committee is that there is considerable lack of joined up activity across government to deliver this agenda. We have multiple ministers appearing before us, and they regularly say they don't have responsibility for the subject that we're talking about.
Well, the whole of government is working to deliver this agenda, and you can see the efforts in the results that they're producing, because we are securing record sums of investment in green technology. We're reducing our carbon output, and we're creating many tens of thousands of jobs.
My final question, Prime Minister, is the UN Secretary-General said in his opening remarks that his intent for the next year is to establish metrics to measure performance by countries in meeting their NDC commitments at COP. Are you intending to introduce new metrics and measurements to be able to measure your own performance, your government's performance against its commitments?
The measurements are clear for everybody to see, and they're there in the reductions of CO2 that we achieve, and one of the things that was achieved at COP26 was agreement on the Paris rule book, so that everybody has common metrics and common dates by which they judge progress.
Thank you, Mr. Dung. Just to follow up his machinery of government point, I'm quite surprised you're so happy with the machinery of government, which you, under COVID, I seem to remember you were very frustrated with it and you didn't feel it worked. So what has changed, or are there lessons we've learned from COVID that we can implement that will accelerate and give the public confidence that we're going to implement these changes?
I didn't say I was happy, Sir Bernard. I don't think I said I was happy. I said that so far, as far as I can see, right, departments are working. They're pretty. The beauty of the 10-point plan was it set out pretty clearly where we need to get to, and how to get there. And what we're also now producing is 10 specific roadmaps for each of the areas. So for EVs or carbon capture and storage or whatever, we are producing. We're producing for business the things that government is doing to make each of the 10 great projects investable, and I think that will help things greatly.
But COVID demonstrated if you produce real data, engage the public, and set up the machinery to drive the process, you can achieve miracles. Isn't that what we need to do with this post-COP agenda?
Yes, and that's what we're doing. And so we have a delivery unit, as you all know, Sir Bernard, under Emily Lawson, but with many others working to her, that is chivying everybody, that is studying the data in real time and seeing where we're going.
Thank you. Now moving to Neil Parish, Chairman of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I want to talk about the practicalities, really. We've signed up as one of the countries to reduce methane by 30%. So, I mean, we've got much of our red meat industry, beef and sheep, is produced on permanent pasture, and that permanent pasture holds a lot of carbon in the soil. So that's a good thing. So how do we balance reducing our methane? Is it take all the sheep and cattle off the hill, off of Exmoor? I don't think you want that. So how do we help farmers to get to this 30%, not just by reducing numbers? Can we bring in new technologies? What can we do to help the farming sector?
Well, Neil, Ms. Parish, I'm told that there very substantial progress is being made with new technology to reduce the methane emissions from livestock, and I think we should encourage those, and I think you can do it without in any way jeopardising the quality of the of British food, British meat, and we should look at some of the breeding techniques as diet. There are things that we're looking at.
There's a Dutch company that's investing in Scotland to produce feed additives that will also, they claim, will reduce emissions from methane gas from animals by up to 30%. So I think there's a lot we can do. So can you sort of commit also to help farming with that new technology as well?
Yes, and I think in New Zealand they've as you know, they use seaweed, or they found that seaweed can be an important additive. We're looking at all that sort of thing.
Yeah, because I think the type of grass they graze, the more easier they can digest, the less methane gas basically they give off. So I think there's much we can do. I want to move on now to UK finances is funding deforestation. We've looked into this, and many banks in this country, bankroll these big companies in Brazil. I mean, Brazil has cut down, the equivalent of twice the size of Devon rainforests in the last year alone. So can we do more to strengthen our legislation to stop British financial institutions funding deforestation?
Yes, but that's what they all agreed I think about 40 of them at COP. Barclays, Aviva, loads of them. Schroders, I can't remember, a big long list. And what that means is that their account holders, their shareholders, and their customers will hold them to account if they continue to finance deforestation. And so that, the agreement at COP to halt and reverse deforestation for 90% of the world's forests, that's underpinned now by agreement from financial institutions not to fund it, and also agreement from the some of the big companies, grain companies and others, Cargill and so forth, not to use product that comes from deforested land.
That's right, because again in Brazil the savanna is being ploughed up to grow soya beans, so all of this is actually still coming in. So I think it's very laudable what's gone on at COP, but I think, Prime Minister, what we need to do is make sure it does affect what we buy and that we don't actually stop our agricultural production in this country and import from deforested land. I hope we're determined to make sure
we should,
that doesn't happen.
Of course, Mr. Parish, but there is no power greater than the power of the consumer. And that is what will make the difference, and people will, in the end, people will make choices about the firms whose food they buy based on where it comes from. And large numbers of companies at COP signed up not to.
And that also, Prime Minister, needs to be recognised in our trade deals, does it not?
Well, I certainly think that you can make a lot of progress in these areas on trade deals. And all the countries concerned that we're doing trade deals with, as you know, signed up, I think, to the compact on forests.
Right, provided that we're not importing that food that's from deforestation. Finally, just on plastics. I mean, we are, plastics are predicted to being a bigger carbon emitter than coal, and I think you are dedicated, like I am, to actually reduce the amount of plastic used. The trouble is a lot of the government efforts at the moment are about tackling plastic waste and recycling. Now that may be laudable, but in the end, if we could actually reduce the amount of plastic we use in the first place, I think would be a much better. So what initiatives do you see? Do you tax sort of the original plastics when we make the plastic in the first place? Because you've got to have a method of actually reducing the amount of plastics we see being used.
Yes, you're completely right that the answer is not recycling, and as you know, we're bringing forward measures to stop the export of plastic waste to developing countries, as we said we would in the manifesto, which I think is right. But you've also got to stop the needless domestic consumption of production of plastic stuff. So that's why the charging for bags in supermarkets has led to a 95% fall in bag use. We're banning, I think, stirrers and so on and so forth.
We just need to get the deposit return scheme things going. They've all been delayed. So, can you give us assurance that, when it be bottles or what it may be, that we actually get that also up and running?
Yeah, but what we also need to do is recognise that the best answer is reduce. Reduce comes before reuse or recycle. Yeah. Reduce. And there are alternatives to plastics.
So we look forward to new government initiatives.
I think it's seaweed again. I think it's seaweed maybe one of the key. Seaweed seems to be the answer for everything, but it's not just seaweed. There's plenty of alternatives.
Can we move on? Sarah Champion, Chairman of the International Development Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, can I just take you back to an answer you gave to an earlier question about relationship education? It should have been mandatory in all primary schools in September 2020, but that's not happened. Could I ask you to intervene and make sure it is mandatory, because it's the key to preventing child abuse and violence against women and girls?
Let me look into it. I'm afraid it's something that hasn't really been brought to my attention before. I will look into it. As far as I can remember, hasn't been brought to my attention before. I will look into it.
Thank you. Can I turn to Afghanistan?
Yes.
I'm sure you'll agree with me. It's looking like hell on earth over there at the moment. You've got the drought, you've got the flooding, you've got the conflicts, you've got millions of displaced people, the infrastructure collapsing, and more than half the country facing starvation over what's going to be a very harsh winter. I really welcome the fact that we're committing to put in more aid, but I wonder if you could speak on how you actually see that being delivered and when you see that being delivered.
Well, we're making sure that we've doubled aid to 286 million, as you know, pounds. We're working as fast as we can to ensure it gets to the people who need it. You're right that the situation is grim. We are.
The problem, Prime Minister, is much of the delivery, particularly on the healthcare, was done by women. And of course, if we're expecting them to step up and deliver the aid, that's putting them in the face of danger.
I appreciate that point, and we must make our position clear to the Taliban authorities that we expect them to treat women fairly and equally, as is obviously expressly provided for in the Quran, and we must also engage with the Taliban. This is a slightly controversial thing, but I was strongly of the view when Kabul fell and we had the change of regime that there was no point in the UK just standing on the sidelines and failing to engage with the Taliban. They may not speak for all Afghans, far from it, but they are some kind of authority in Kabul, even if a very imperfect authority. The UK must try to engage for the sake of the people that we are talking about, if we're going to get aid through. So that's why we sent Sir Simon Gass out, who did an outstanding job in talking to the Taliban. It doesn't because we necessarily relish the things that they have said or done, but we see practical advantage for the people of Afghanistan.
Thank you. Prime Minister, going back to climate change, how much of the 12.6 billion that you've pledged for climate finance will actually be spent on loss and damage?
I can't give you the figure now, Sarah, but I'll write to you. Loss and I think one of the reasons we got an agreement at COP26 was because we had the chapter on loss and damage. How much I think I'm sure the answer is out there, but I'll come back to you.
Thank you very much. I really welcome that you've signed up to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. So does this mean that you will now also change your policy on supporting fossil fuel projects in low and middle income countries through your UK Export Finance Organisation and the money that you give to the Commonwealth Development Corporation?
Yes, what we want to do is for middle income countries and for every country that's having difficulty moving past coal, which is loads and loads of participants. The UK has pioneered with our American and European friends a new model, the country platform, where we set out the portfolio of projects that we want to support, but where we want the SMEs, the private sector, the big banks to come in as well. And these are projects where people can make a good profit as well as helping to cut CO2. So that's what we're working on.
Excellent, because the problem at the moment is the exceptions to that rule are pretty broad. So if you could take to look at the guidance that's being given to our finance institutes to try and close that, that would be really appreciated. I wonder also how you personally reconcile the new funding to support the global efforts to tackle climate change with the severe cuts to UK aid programme. I'm thinking specifically the money that we give to Bangladesh, which of course is vulnerable to flooding and sea level rising, is seeing a 62% cut in our aid in the next year. Ethiopia, where the climate change and conflict blight the lives of millions, will see a 55% reduction in the UK aid. So is it a situation that you're giving with one hand but you're taking away with the other?
No, because we are making a massive commitment to climate finance, as you know, which is of of great value to those countries. And on ODA generally, in spite of the temporary reduction to 0.5 because of the pandemic, because of the exceptional pressures that we face, we're still spending £10 billion in ODA this year in 2021. That means that we are the third largest ODA donor in the G7 as a percentage of GNI.
We're the only G7 that's cut our funding, though.
And the percentage goes back up, as you know, by 24-25. I think most people in this country can see what a huge sum of money we're giving to the world. They think it's right, but they also accept that in the grip of a pandemic, when we had to spend £407 billion to look after people in this country, it was right to adjust things.
I understand that, but I think the problem is that the immediate pressing issues are not being funded, and yet we're seen to be dangling money for climate finance in the future. So I wonder how you actually reconcile those two things together in your own mind.
We are funding the as much as we can of the pressing issues. 10 billion is a lot. We're investing more in, for instance, in girls' education, and we pledged another £430 billion with the Global Partnership for Education, for £1 million, I should say, Global Partnership for Education over the next 5 years.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You have, though, cut 183 million to girls' education this year. Thank you, Chair.
And please could we not forget the very important funding for securing women's rights to control over their fertility, so that we can help support population control in developing countries. Yes. That seems to be a very important part of
it. Is. And education, if I may say so, Sir Bernard, is the prior.
Yes, but education without access to contraception is not worth nearly as much, Prime Minister, is it?
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to the budget and spending block of questions. I'm sorry we're going to detain you a little longer, Prime Minister, but we're not that far behind, I'm pleased to say, despite everyone going over time. Mel Stride, Treasury Select Committee.
Thank you, Bernard, and good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon, Mel.
In March, Prime Minister, you told this committee, and I quote, "I strongly believe in a low-tax government, and I am a low-tax Conservative." But I just wondered how you squared that with the fact that your latest spending commitments around the budget and the comprehensive spending review have led the OBR to forecast that the UK's tax burden will rise to its highest level since the government of Clement Attlee post-war.
But for the very simple reason, Mel, Mr. Stride, that the country has been through the biggest fall in output, not just since the Second World War, but before the Second World War, the biggest that I can see for a very, very long time. And we had to look after people throughout the pandemic. We had to spend upwards of £407 billion on schemes to keep businesses going, to keep people, to put bread on family tables, to look after everybody in the country. And I think everybody understood the huge fiscal impact of that.
If I can, I'd certainly accept we had to spend a great deal of money, but a big choice was made at the time of the budget, particularly with the forecasts having improved from March as to what the Chancellor did with that extra fiscal space. And he had a number of choices, and two of those were, did he spend more, or did he relieve the pressure on tax increases? And the decision seems to have been taken that he would spend an awful lot more. In fact, in the budget, he trumpeted the fact that he was spending a greater increase in public expenditure than any government this century, I think he put it. Is that something you're comfortable with, and how does that square with your ambition by the end of this Parliament of getting taxes down?
Well, what the Chancellor also did was cut taxes for the low paid very considerably, about
but overall the tax burden is going to rise, isn't it?
£1,200 for a single mum on or single parent on universal credit.
But Prime Minister, in the round, though, the tax burden is going to go up very considerably. So we've had huge corporation tax increases, we've had a freezing of the threshold for income tax. These are huge, broadly based tax increases that are going on. And I'm just interested in how you think we're going to get those taxes down, given all the spending that's going on.
First of all, unemployment is much lower than forecast. People said it would be 12% it's now actually running at levels we saw before the pandemic. It's quite an extraordinary thing. Unemployment is a very expensive as well as a very wasteful and hateful thing. So we're also seeing faster growth than many people forecast. We have the fastest growth.
But the OBR's forecast on growth going forward is fairly anemic.
We have the fastest growth forecast for the G7 next year. What I believe the Chancellor's strategy is, and it's what I certainly support, is to ensure that Britain, the UK, takes the steps now to deal with the debt that we built up, to deal with the fiscal impact of COVID, but also to make the long-term investment we need to drive up productivity and get growth out of the economy. Because just on the looking at the big, if you want the big economic strategy, for decades this country has underperformed in productivity and
Can I just ask on productivity, as you mentioned it, Prime Minister, you've urged at various points that companies should pay their workers more. Do you accept that if wages go up and productivity doesn't, and the OBR suggests it won't be moving very much over the coming years, that just leads to inflation? And are you concerned about inflation and the impact that could have on the public finances?
I think you've always got to watch inflation. The numbers today, I think, speak to the price of energy, the difficulties in global supply chains, an economy coming out of COVID. But I'd rather have a situation now in which there was a big demand for labour and an economy recovering strongly and people wanting employees, than a situation in which you and I remember well from decades ago, both in the 80s and in the 90s, of millions of people unfairly, unnecessarily having their talents wasted because of unemployment. That's far crueler. And what I hope is that we can see investments now leading to. You're quite right in the point that you make about wages without comparable productivity.
Well, this increases. Is a critical point.
But that's why we need to invest now in the other ingredients that drive productivity: skills, training, infrastructure, and making sure that people are able to live nearer their place.
That's right, and that will take time. If that investment is made, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to see productivity suddenly spike up in the next year or two as a consequence of that. And is not the danger that by talking up wages as we are at the moment, with inflation so high, knowing that productivity is low at the moment and has been since the financial crisis of 2007, that we're going to push inflation still further? We could end up in a wage price spiral that will have devastating consequences on the public finances. So do you think that maybe the government needs to be a bit more thoughtful when it comes to this urging employers to constantly put up wages without commensurate increases in productivity?
I think if I may say so, I think you're slightly over-egging what the government's been doing. Yeah. The government has, as it happens, I think that people should be paid fairly for what they do. I think it's right that the living wage has gone up, but wages and prices are not for the government to set. They're there for the market to agree.
But they do condition the expectation amongst the labour market as to where wages might be going every time the government says, come on, everybody's got to have a pay rise, but there's no productivity improvement to go with it.
Well, I think that I think you're ascribing too much power. I think it was the Emperor Diocletian who tried that, and it didn't work.
Well, that's an essay question we'll know the answer to in time.
Work and Pensions Chair Stephen Timms.
On the budget, I welcome the additional funding for universal credit in the budget, but shouldn't some of that have been directed towards people who are not working? There's almost a quarter of people who claim universal credit are not required to look for work because of their health problems or because they're caring for young children. They all lost the £20 a week uplift. They're facing the big price rises that we know about. Shouldn't some of the help have been provided for them?
I understand completely, Mr. Timms, why you say that. But just to go back to what I was saying to Mel Stride, what we're trying to do now is encourage people into work, and so the situation at the moment is that we have actually in some places a serious labour shortage, and therefore the incentive should be to get people into better paid work, which is why I think the Chancellor was absolutely right to cut the taxes of the taper relief on universal credit so as to make work pay more for those on UC. Now, for those who are not in work on UC, I understand perfectly the point that you make, and they are people that we must look after in any event. But that for them, there are other interventions that we have, such as the £500 million for local councils, the energy price caps, the freezing of fuel duty, the winter homes, the winter fuel allowance, cold weather payments, and support for the cost of childcare. There are many. You and I have talked many times about people who have no recourse to public funds. Yeah. Even they have those types of support.
Do you agree, I think you will, but do you agree that Social Security should provide an adequate safety net for families?
Yes, I do, but I think the best, it's very important, of course I do, but the best thing for those families is to help one member at least of that family into work. Yes. And that's why I think what we were doing with universal credit was right.
But our committee has heard from parents, for example, who will have to skip meals in order to make sure that their children don't have to skip meals because of the £20 a week reduction. That shouldn't be happening, should it? Shouldn't the Social Security safety net avoid that from happening?
Yes, it does, but
my point is it doesn't. I mean, certainly the evidence to our committee is that parents are having to skip meals at the moment.
Well, we're doing everything we can to support people in those circumstances. With the £500 million household support fund, I think it was the 200 million holiday activity and food programme for families who are in particular hardship. And I know how hard it can be for some families, but we are putting money into supporting those families. I think that it's also important to stress the value of work as the way forward.
Yeah, the headline rate of benefit at the moment is the lowest it's been in real terms for over 30 years. In those 30 years, the economy has grown by more than half in real terms, and yet support for unemployed families hasn't gone up at all in that time. That doesn't seem right, does it?
Well, I'll have to study those figures. The welfare budget, as you know, because you're a great authority on this, the welfare budget is still extremely big.
Yeah. Well, let me just finally quote to you a statistic from that House of Commons library that says that if you compare the level of unemployment support today with average earnings, it's less than it was when Lloyd George introduced unemployment benefit 110 years ago. There's something, I think, that's going seriously wrong there. Can I just ask about one different...
Can I just repeat my point? We're in a situation now where there is a massive demand for labour, and we want to encourage people through the benefit system into work, and that's why it's structured in the way that it is.
But you want them to afford meals, though? The meals,
of course, yeah. And that's why we have the protections that we have.
A final point, if I may, about a different topic. In our meeting in July, you kindly undertook to look at the online safety bill that we've discussed already this afternoon, given that one of its key objectives is to tackle online fraud. I know you've had a letter today from Martin Lewis, Sir Richard Branson, Dawn French and others who've all appeared in online scam adverts, calling on you, as we were talked at the meeting in July, about regulating online scam advertising or regulating online advertising in the online safety bill. Have you been able to make any headway in looking at that point?
Thank you. I haven't seen the letter from the people that you mentioned were certainly very concerned about online scams or online ads of any kind, and I know that we're looking into this. Again, I refer you to what we're doing in the online harms bill.
At the moment, the bill isn't proposed to regulate paid-for advertising. You made the point in July that you'd have a look at that.
Let me see what I can find out about that, Mr. Timms. As far as I understand it, at the moment, the view is that the bill can't deal with every ill caused by the internet, and it may be that that's one thing that it's failing to do. One of many things that it's failing to do, but I will get back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Timpson. Angus Brenda McNeill, Chair of the Trade Committee. Oh, I beg your pardon, Tobias Elwood. I do apologise.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Prime Minister.
Defence.
We've had 2 terrorist attacks in the UK this last month. It's now 2 decades since 9/11, and extremism is now on the rise, no doubt spurred by events in Afghanistan. The internet is now more powerful than the pulpit in the mosque. Should we be doing more to tackle online radicalisation?
I think there's always much more that we should do to tackle radicalisation online or otherwise. And when you look at some of the cases that we've seen recently, it's clear that people are increasingly adept at using concealed devices to conceal their internet, tracking their internet history as they radicalise themselves. We need to be wise to that. I think what we also need to do, Mr. Elwood, is we need to be much more ruthless in joining the dots together, because so often with characters who cause responsible terrorist attacks or whatever, there will be things in their past that are signals or indicators of a likelihood that they will do this. And each of them individually may not be enough to trigger our concerns.
Can I welcome that? But I'm also interested in what is online and whether you think there should be more responsibility to be taken by online organisations, and I hope you'd lean into this. Yes. Can I just move on? The last time we met here, you agreed the world's becoming more unstable, more complex. There's an increase in political warfare, along with a rise in extremism we just discussed, and authoritarianism. And we now see examples of that playing out in Eastern Europe. Can I ask what military assistance we can offer both Poland and indeed Ukraine to show Russia that we are serious about deterring any kinetic action?
The 2 cases are very different, as you know, because Poland has a NATO security guarantee, and under Article 5 we're committed to the defence of Poland, as you know. Ukraine, sadly for historical reasons, does not have the same guarantee from NATO powers. Actually, Ukraine doesn't even have a membership action programme, as you know. So what we've got to do is to make sure that everybody understands that the cost of miscalculation on the borders of both Ukraine and of Poland would be enormous. And I think that my impression, as I'm sure you would agree, having been to Ukraine several times, met people there, as I'm sure our colleagues have around this room, talked to them, I think it would be a tragic mistake for the Kremlin to think there was anything to be gained by militarism.
I put it to you that the only way that we're going to deter potentially Russia from to mass troops on the border with Ukraine from venturing into the Donbass region is by us saying now exactly what the consequences would be. I invite that for you to take that away with you. COP26 has helped illustrate just how fragile our planet is, but our turnaround to repair this damage is measured in decades, carbon neutral by 2050. This means that globally we must now brace ourselves for profound changes to our way of life over the next decade. Crop failures leading to mass food shortages, lands becoming too hot to live in, all leading to mass migration on biblical scales. This will test governments across the world, particularly in Africa. Does the Prime Minister agree with David Attenborough, who said, "Make no mistake, climate change is the biggest security threat that modern humans have ever faced"?
I think he's right in that, and actually I made a speech to the UN Security Council saying substantially the same thing.
Thank you. Bringing those two themes together, the Red Book here on page 40 confirms defence spending is set to fall over the next 4 years. The current budget has been stretched by the requirement to cover cyber and space domains at the expense of the traditional services. So tanks, ships, planes and troop numbers are all now being cut. Would you agree, Prime Minister, that the integrated review is arguably out of date and we now need to look seriously at defence spending to be increased to 3%?
No, I must respectfully, I know you're a great authority on these matters, Mr. Elwood, but I must respectfully dissent from you when you say that the integrated review is out of date, because I think what would be out of date would be to, first of all, we're spending record sums on defence, £24 billion to reform and renew our armed forces. 2.4%.
No, I know the numbers. Yeah, I know them well. But I'm trying to say that
what I'm saying to you is I disagree.
This is a peacetime budget.
I disagree
and
with
we've
you.
just confirmed that the threats are growing, and therefore we cannot manage. The budget is being reduced by 0.4%. I have it here in front of me in the Red Book. The point I'm trying to say is I'm simply inviting you to recognise the growing threats that are coming over the horizon and ask you to please recognise and reconsider where the integrated review now is and what we need to prepare for.
If you're saying, Mr. Elwood, that you think we should go back and prepare for tank battles in...
no, you're putting words into my mouth.
I don't know but you're saying that you mentioned...
But you mentioned tanks. We are cutting back on our tanks. What is amassing on the Russian border, right on the Ukrainian border? It's tanks, arguably enough. Well, but that's besides the point. I'm saying step back, look at the wider security picture, look at our defence posture and see what needs to be done.
If you think that UK tanks are the answer, then...
No, now you're going down an avenue.
You're saying that we should commit UK tanks to the defence of Ukraine.
No. You're deliberately... I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you're taking us down this rabbit hole, because you know perfectly well it's not about tanks.
I'm not taking you down a rabbit hole.
Tanks are one element of a wide spectrum of our defence capability.
You brought up tanks, Mr. Elwood.
Tanks.
You brought up
aircraft.
Tanks.
48 aircraft, F-35s. You promised 138. You've cut back to 48. You cut back on not just tanks. Warriors have been removed completely. Hercules aircraft removed completely. And then 10,000 troopers have been removed. So we can talk about tanks, or we can talk about the wider spectrum of capabilities that have been reduced. At the very time I'm trying to make clear that there are bigger threats coming over the horizon.
Yes, Prime Minister. And I think what I'm trying to make clear is I think that it's now or never for the UK Armed Forces. We have to recognise that the old concepts of fighting big tank battles on the European landmass, which I think is what you're driving at, are over. And there are other better things that we should be investing in the FCAS, in the Future Combat Air System, in cyber. This is how warfare of the future is going to be fought in our advanced early warning systems, and that is where we need to be. I think that the investments that we are making,
you can't hold ground with cyber.
In new technology are absolutely indispensable to our ability to fight the wars of the 21st century. And I don't think that going back to a 1940s style approach will serve us.
Okay, Mr. McNeill, Trade Committee Chair.
So you're an advocate, as we all know, of Brexit. You're now an advocate of trade deals, which I think we'll both agree in the circumstances are a good thing, given where we are. Now, your government figures will say that Brexit will cost something like 4.9% of GDP, the OBR 4% of GDP, and we can correspond that for ease of understanding to £490 or £400. The question I want to ask you is, what will you recoup in the trade deals that you're now an advocate of? With New Zealand, for instance, how much will you recoup, either in percentages or pounds? And Australia, what will you recoup?
I think that both deals will give opportunities
numbers.
to... I can't give you numbers. It depends.
Luckily, I'm here because
it depends how much the Australians and the New Zealanders decide to pay.
Let the Prime Minister answer the question.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. What we do have is a big opportunity for Scottish beef, for Scottish whiskey. No, it's not. These industries...
the numbers you're looking for...
Let the Prime Minister answer the question, and I'll come back to
respect, Mr. Chairman, he's waffling. I'm looking for numbers. He hasn't got numbers, so I'm wanting to progress.
Well, the UK deal alone could increase exports by about £100 million. That's quite a lot of that will be Scotch whisky.
Larger.
Is that to be? Are you nickling?
No.
Turning up your nose at that?
I'm saying
you against it. SNP is against every free trade deal that's ever done.
No, I've just
and by
said
the way,
with it.
never let it be forgotten. They were against joining the EU.
Stop heckling yourself. What we're looking for here is the answer is for £400 or £490 that Brexit costs. There will be £400 or £490 when Brexit costs. An Australian trade deal will take back £2. And a New Zealand trade deal would take back £1. So you're still £487 out of pocket, is the deal that you've landed the British people. And that is why you have the problems you have. You're in a pickle with Ireland, as well you know. It's probably knows the British problem in Ireland. Has Ireland been independent a nuisance to you, Prime Minister? Because I sometimes wonder if you wish it never became independent and richer per capita than the UK, or are you quite happy that it has? I mean, what is your relationship with Ireland at the moment, given the threat of the protocol and your triggering of 16?
We have terrific relations with Dublin, and I think they're just about our biggest trading partner.
Fantastic. At least you didn't quibble that they were being independent and in the EU, which some of the wider-eyed Brexiteers do quibble about. Moving on, do you think yourself, Sir Keir Starmer and Sir Ed Davies, should stop sending big-value donors to the House of Lords, commonly known as cash for honours, and seen as a very corrupt practice internationally?
I think didn't you raise that with me earlier on today?
Yes, and I'm looking for an answer. Well, it was actually my colleague, Jonathan Edwards, applied. I happened to be sitting beside him.
That's right. I saw you jumping up and down. And look, I think the answer to
should the practice end?
The answer to that is that these are by and large men and women who have contributed a huge amount to public life.
Like £3 million.
Until you get rid of the system by which the trades union barons fund other parties, we have to go ahead, or you have a completely taxpayer funded system of politics. We need to continue with a system by which public spirited people give donations.
But find themselves in the House of Lords. This is selling peerages.
The people who, the people you're talking about have done, I think, things that acts of great public service for a long time.
You say you believe in levelling up. When will you level up the electricity market that's working against many parts of Scotland? Green energy that could be produced in Scotland's islands is cost far more due to the structures of your government to take green energy to the main UK market than to buy it from the equivalent distance in the continental market. It's something, if you believe in levelling up, that the transmission and distribution costs need to be equalised for fairness, and not just that, but for climate targets to be caught. A very serious point of Scotland's islands could, if interconnectors were there and the right CFD levels were given, could make it less reliant, actually, on European producers.
There is an issue about the cost of transmission, and you're right to raise it. We're looking at it.
Okay, thank you for that. Last point I want to raise with you was when we spoke in this format happily 14 months ago. I see you recall it. You said, I asked you about who would be responsible in the UK for empty supermarket shelves, and you said it's certainly going to be me and the government. Do you stand by that still?
Yes, I do. Because
you're responsible for the empty supermarket shelves.
What do you mean by responsible? Well, responsible for trying to help improve supply chains, and that's now starting to happen. But the problems, the responsibility for the problem is one that's caused by a great many global factors. If you're talking about HGV drivers, there are shortages of HGV drivers
I raised them
around the world.
You
did, I remember. But there are shortages of HGV drivers in the United States and in China and across the world. What we're doing now is trying to accelerate the progression.
Do you think Brexit's made it worse?
No, I think that it's a pan-European problem, and what we want to see is people in this country wanting to become HGV drivers because it's a well-paid, highly skilled
job,
job,
job?
With good conditions. And I think sometimes, frankly, the conditions have not been very attractive, least of all for women.
Thank you, Sir Ben.
Well, Prime Minister, if you want me to renew my HGV Class 1 licence, I'm standing by.
Yeah, well, I think
Jeremy Hunt,
anyway.
Health Committee Chair.
Prime Minister, there's no one after me, so you can relax and take your time. I've just got two topics, and I'm sure we can get through them briefly. The first one is about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
Yeah.
Her husband, Richard, as you know, just completed 21 days of hunger strike, and the Iranians have often linked her detention and that of Anousheh Shouri, Murad Tabaz and Miran Roof to repayment of a historic debt. Can I just confirm with you that as an independent sovereign country, the decision to repay that debt is our decision and no other country, certainly not the United States, has any kind of veto over that decision to repay that debt?
Well, Jeremy, Mr. Hunt, you'll be familiar with the complexities of this sad case from your own time in the Foreign Office, and you'll know how difficult it has been to, forgive me, to resolve. But what I can tell you is that we continue to work with the Iranians, but of course with other partners around the world, including the Americans, who have similar problems of dual nationals in detention in Iran. Am I happy with the way things are at the moment? No. Should we be able to sort it out immediately with a snap of the fingers by repaying the IMS obligations? Yes, in an ideal world that would be terrific. But as you know from your own experience, it's more complicated than that.
I do understand that, and I understand there are sanctions. Yesterday, Jeremy Wright, former Attorney General, said that because the debt predates the sanctions, there is a legitimate argument that it would be okay to pay it. But if you can't use a bank to repay it for various reasons, why can't we do what President Obama did in January 2016 and fly over a crate of cash to Tehran and just repay that debt?
Well, it's certainly worth considering. But as you know, there are complexities attached.
I do understand that.
And I think it is also important to recognise that there are other dual nationals, UK dual nationals, UK in addition to Nazanin, who form a part of the equation, and we have to be very sensitive to their needs as well.
I absolutely understand that. Now, there's one thing that you could say to all of them that would give them great comfort, which is that their fate won't in any way be linked by the UK to the outcome of the JCPOA talks in Vienna. They won't be used as a pawn to put pressure on the Iranians. I mean, last thing I wanted to say is Nazanin herself is under house arrest effectively, but she can see TV clips. Have you got a message to her about the 5.5 years that it's taken?
Yes.
And whether she can get home for Christmas?
I want to say to Nazanin, and she and I have been in touch, as I'm sure she was in touch with you when you were Foreign Secretary, that I'm horrified. I continue to be horrified by the ordeal she's been through. I have nothing but admiration of for the way in which she's dealt with it. It's been unbearable to witness, and I know how much she wants to come home and to see her family and to see Richard, to see her daughter, and to be able to come back to this country. I can tell you that we are working as hard as we can to ensure that we deliver that. It is not easy, and if I could tell Nazanin now that we'd have her home for Christmas. I certainly wouldn't. It breaks my heart that I can't make that promise, but we will continue to do what we can.
Thank you. Second area from me, completely different. It's NHS staffing. And we know that in the pandemic, we've recruited 5,500 more doctors, 10,000 more nurses, which is very welcome. But we also know that there are 93,000 vacancies in the NHS, with shortages in every single specialty. Now, Sir Bernard, I and 5 other select committee chairs have put down an amendment to the health bill asking for independent estimates to be published every couple of years as to how many doctors and nurses we should be training. Will the government support that amendment?
Well, I'm very interested in what you're saying, and I'm very interested in the amendment, but we have our own targets and ambitions as government. As you know, we want another 50,000 more nurses, and we're on track to deliver that by the end of the Parliament. There is now a record number of healthcare professionals in the NHS, more than ever before. We are working as hard as we can to get more GPs, which was raised earlier with me in the House, and to get more radiographers. We're short in many key areas. Whether our campaign would be helped by the measures that you propose, I can't say, but we're very happy to study them.
Just to be clear, we're not asking for any new targets, just for independent estimates of the numbers that we should be training, given that it takes 7 years to train a doctor. Could I just ask you to put yourselves in the shoes of a doctor or nurse on the front line? So the Royal Colleges, just to give you the exact numbers, who are by no means political extremists, they're very reasonable. They have calculated we need 500 more obstetricians, 1,400 more anaesthetists, 1,900 more radiologists, 2,000 more midwives, 2,000 more A&E consultants, 2,500 more GPs, and 39,000 nurses today. So why would you not want to give those people on the front line the encouragement that we are at least, if we can't solve the problem right away, we're at least training enough for the future?
Well, I'm not ruling your idea out, Jeremy. What I'm saying is that we've set some pretty ambitious targets already. We've got record numbers in the NHS. We'll look at your idea.
Thank you. And last one, Sir Bernard, very briefly. Yes. All that training is funded by Health Education England, but even after the spending review, they still haven't been given their budget. Could you promise, with all these desperate staff shortages, that it won't be cut in real terms?
The budget and the spending review add another 36. If you look at the health and social care,
but the bit of it that's on training has not been settled.
Another 36 billion on top of the extra 92 billion that we put into frontline healthcare, on top of the 33 billion that we put in 2 years ago when we came in. I'm sure that there is within the NHS budget there must be funds for health education, but I will look at what you say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
You've been generous with your time with us today, and generous that you've given us the 3 sessions this year on top of the delayed session in January. So it's the 4th session.
This is the 4th session.
As you are right. Yes. But thank you for that, and we will see you next year.
See you next year. Thank you. Thank you.
Order.
Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room.